It was June 18th, 1815. On the rolling plains near the village of Waterloo, Belgium, one of the most decisive battles in history unfolded. The Duke of Wellington, leading the Allied forces, faced Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who had terrorized Europe for over a decade. By the end of that day, Napoleon's dreams of dominance lay shattered. Defeated, he abdicated for the second time, and by July of the same year, he was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, never to return. This is the story of how the Iron Duke, fresh from defeating Napoleon, narrowly escaped death on the streets of Paris. In July 1815, the Allies sought to restore stability to France, and King Louis XVIII was returned to the throne. But this restoration was not without its challenges. The Allies, wary of lingering Bonapartist sympathies, stationed their armies in France for a minimum of 3 years to ensure the king's rule could solidify and a loyal army could be rebuilt. It was a delicate balance, a city and a nation attempting to heal, while wounds of war were still raw. For Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, his role was far from over. As Commander-in-Chief of the Allied occupation forces in Paris, he found himself not only a symbol of victory, but also a target for those who viewed him as the enemy. The whispers of resentment circulated, and the threat was real. On June 25, 1816, the Duke gave a ball at his residence in the Rue des Champs-Élysées. The rooms were crowded with guests when an alarm was given that the house was on fire. One of the lower windows facing the street had been broken. Iron bars forced and gunpowder and cartridges had been placed next to a barrel of oil. However, the fire was discovered early and was extinguished before any real damage was done. On January 15, 1818, Wellington's personal secretary, Colonel Ulysses Berg, received a letter from Paris signed F.G., warning of a plot to assassinate the Duke. Wellington didn't take any notice of the warning, but then on the 30th of January, Wellington's Chief of Staff, General George Murray, received another letter from a different person, a Lord Charles Kinnaird, who stated that he had been visited by a French exile in Brussels who told him of an assassination plot and that someone had established themselves in Paris and was waiting for the Duke's arrival. The informant had offered to go to Paris to point out the assassin in exchange for 3 of his exiled friends to be allowed to return to France. Again, the Duke took the matter very lightly and said, "I could not do that to procure my own safety from assassination, which I did not think it proper to do on other grounds." One person who harboured a grudge against Wellington was a man called Marie-André Nicolas Cantillon. Cantillon was a former soldier in Napoleon's army. He had actually retired with a pension in 1813, but rejoined for the 100 days when Napoleon returned from exile until the Battle of Waterloo. Now embittered by France's defeat and longing for vengeance, at 12:30 in the morning on February 11, 1818, under the cover of darkness, Cantillon took his chance. As Wellington's carriage made its way through the Parisian streets from a ball he had attended to his residence on the Champs-Élysées, Cantillon, concealed in the shadows, raised his pistol. Wellington described the assassination attempt in a letter to Earl Bathurst, the Secretary of State for War and the Colonies. He said, "A pistol was fired at my carriage, close to my own door, at about 12:30 on the night before last, by a well-dressed person, who immediately ran away and made his escape. The sentries at the door were, at the time, within the carriage entranceway, as they usually are in the night, and it appears that the man had accompanied the carriage at an accelerated pace about 60 or 70 yards along the street Rue des Champs-Élysées. He then took post behind the sentry box while the carriage was turning to enter the carriage entranceway and fired at the moment it was entering. I believe the horses had entered, and, in short, he was so close to the house and carriage that I, who saw the flash and heard the report, conceived that one of the sentries had probably laid down his arms, and that, in taking them up awkwardly upon the approach of the carriage, his musket had gone off. Nobody was hurt, and the carriage was not even touched. Though I did not see the assassin, I am quite certain he was a military person, and one of considerable intelligence. No common person would have ventured to commit the crime within 2 yards of my sentries, and none but a military man who had well observed the carriage entranceway and the mode in which the duty was done by the sentries could have seen that while the horses and carriage were entering, the sentries could not get out, and that the delay would give him time, after the shot was fired, to escape beyond the distance to which the sentries could pursue him. He was very fortunate in his escape. 2 of my English servants were coming home from a public house and heard the shot and saw the flash, and one of them observed to the other that the shot had been fired at my carriage. The assassin afterwards passed them in the street, and they deliberated whether they should stop him, but they determined they would not, as there was no cry or alarm from the house. Although the Duke was unharmed, it was a wake-up call, and he went on to write, "I have taken measures which I hope will ensure me here in future. I don't propose to go any more in my own carriage at night, and I have a carriage so arranged as that the doors cannot be forced open. I shall have arms in it, and a person armed upon the box, and whenever I go to any place where it is probable that the public would expect to see me, I shall be attended by gendarmes." Kitty, the Duke's wife, shared her feelings about the attack in a letter to her friend Lady Hood on the 19th of February. She wrote, "You will have heard of the horrible attempt to assassinate my husband, the preserver of Europe, the first, the greatest of men. But the same hand that has ever protected him in the day of battle protected him now. The same eye watched over him, and ever will, I am sure. Why, then, do I still feel such horror when I think of this attempt? He is now, however, guarded in every possible way, and I do believe is more safe than he has ever before been in Paris. I wish for all that he was at home." A fortnight later she wrote, "No discovery is yet made of the assassin. I never trembled for the Duke in battle, but now I have not a quiet moment." Cantillon had raised the suspicions of the Parisian police when he arrived in the city from Brussels a few days before. On the night of the assassination attempt, guards had chased the suspect, but he had escaped from the scene and all went quiet. Cantillon then shaved off his beard and moustache to avoid recognition while attempting to reach Belgium, but he was spotted and was arrested on the 15th of March. In the meantime, Joseph Stanislas Marinet, the informant, had travelled to Paris with Lord Charles Kinnaird. They were both arrested, but Kinnaird was later released. Cantillon confessed to the police that he had attempted to assassinate Wellington, but a search could not locate the pistol. Cantillon and Marinet were held in prison for 8 months without trial. In November 1818, the Allied occupation in France had come to an end, and Cantillon's lawyer formally complained that no date had been set for the trial. On the 10th of May 1819, the trial officially started and Wellington travelled to Paris. Even though there was a confession, the French police hadn't investigated the alleged connections between Cantillon and a group in Brussels. And as there was no pistol found, there was no evidence linking him to the scene. Cantillon's lawyer acknowledged the confession, but appealed to the jury to find him not guilty, as he said to do otherwise would dishonour France. Cantillon and Marinet were both acquitted. The only punishment he received was a demotion to the rank of sergeant. 2 years later, Napoleon died an ill and embittered man. His will, written on St. Helena and amended countless times, contains an interesting addition. He left 10,000 francs to Cantillon and wrote in his will, "Cantillon has as much right to assassinate that oligarchist as the latter had to send me to perish upon the rock of St. Helena." Part of the money was paid between 1823 and 1826. In 1830, Louis-Philippe became the King of France, and he actually appointed Cantillon as a gamekeeper at the Palace of Fontainebleau. He later became a grocer in Brussels and received the remainder of the money after Napoleon's nephew came to power in 1852. Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, emerged unscathed from Cantillon's plot, his legacy intact. But the events of that night in Paris remain a chilling reminder of how close history came to taking a different path. What if the assassin's aim had been true? What if the man who orchestrated Napoleon's downfall had himself fallen victim to revenge? Would Europe's fragile peace have crumbled under the weight of uncertainty? Wellington became one of Britain's greatest heroes. Napoleon's legend grew even in death, and Cantillon faded into obscurity, living out his days far from the chaos he once embraced. Few recall the shadowy figure who dared to challenge the Duke with a single shot in the middle of the night. Yet his actions serve as a footnote to a turbulent era, an era where even the most secure figures lived under the shadow of danger. As the carriage rattled away into the night, Wellington could not have known that he had escaped more than just a bullet. He had survived a symbol of the deep fractures left behind by Napoleon's empire, a story that history almost forgot. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of history. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. Who will we uncover next? Find out on the next episode of Historical Crime Chronicles.